The stone won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. If I started my intro with a random fact, what kind of fact would it be? Welcome to the 41st episode of Podcast of the Dragon. What do you get when you take Nynaeve and Elaine and have them join the circus? A storyline that provides me no end of entertainment to discuss. In this episode, I look at the cracks in their relationship, examine the narrative choices Jordan makes, rant and rave about the Elaine-Tom abomination, and spend a little time with Galad. The storyline of the Fires of Heaven, where Nynaeve and Elaine join the circus, seems to be something that Wheel of Time fans either love or hate. And those of us who enjoy it always sound like we're defending it, which is possibly a tacit acknowledgement that it has a number of facepalm elements to it. It has Elaine behaving in an uncomfortable and inappropriate manner towards Tom. It has the women making unreasonably stupid choices. It has them being really shitty and catty toward each other, and it has moments of clunky and unnecessary exposition. And I'm sure that when I opined in episode 37 that The Fires of Heaven might be the best written book of the Wheel of Time, there were some listeners who heard that and thought to themselves, but the circus? On the surface, Nynaeve and Elaine's story in Book 5 is another mystery plot. RJ's important characters all have ultimate destinies. The dragon, the Amerlin, the son of battles / prince of ravens, the lord of the two rivers / the wolf king. Elaine's destiny is being the queen of Andor, and Nynaeve is a support character who the dragon will need to succeed in both cleansing the taint and in fighting the Dark One at Shale Ghul. And she's also the queen of Malkir, but because that is a Fourth Age destiny with little significance in the books, I don't feel like it really counts toward her story arc. Being Lon's wife is not part of her ultimate purpose. Being Rand's rock is. Elaine and Nynaeve's destinies don't come to fruition until later on in the series compared to our other heroes, so RJ has to find different ways to keep them occupied while he develops their characters. And so the Supergirl plots, for the most part, have the flavor of a mystery or detective story, like Nynaeve, Elaine, and the trap that they spring totally on purpose, or Nynaeve, Elaine, and the mysterious object of the dragon's doom. Book 5 could be called Nynaeve, Elaine, and Where the Fuck Are the Good Aes Sedai? Also, Let's Hide from Elaine's killjoy brother and a Forsaken who wants to turn Nynaeve into a horse. All of these books have these characters more or less spinning their wheels, and this will continue on into Nynaeve, Elaine, and the search for an excuse to leave Saladar, and Nynaeve, Elaine, and the Magic Punch Bowl. Jordan keeps these women occupied for literally books and books, dealing with minor and yet significant side missions. He does his best to have them do important shit. But the circus plot is unique. RJ provides a series of emotional trials that leave the women with very few choices and explores a lot of Nynaeve's internal fuckery in a narrative that's much more personal. But it starts out with the usual formula of having the women in search mode. They're disguised as small-time merchants with a wagon full of dyes that they've ridden across the length of Terabon. RJ makes it a point to have Tom complain so we know that it's been a month since they left Tanchico. We catch them near the border of Amadicia just after Nynaeve has blown up a dust storm and scared away a bunch of bandits or brigands. They have a brief interaction with some asshat white cloaks that's awkward and uncomfortable. The lieutenant wants news from Tanchico, specifically wanting to know who is in charge because there are quote-unquote rumors. I think RJ is letting us know that the Shanchan have arrived, perhaps within days after our crew left Tanchico. They ride over the border and stop just outside a town called Martison. They settle in to make camp for the night, and Tom is chosen to go into town and get supplies. It says, Nynaeve put her head under the wagon seat and levered up a floorboard with her belt knife. Besides 2 small gilded coppers containing Amathera's presents of jewelry, several leather purses bulging with coin lay in the recess. The Panarch had been more than generous in her desire to see their backs. The other things looked trifling by comparison. A small dark wooden box, polished but plain and uncarved, and a wash-leather purse lying flat and showing the impression of a disc inside. The box held the 2 ter'angreal they had recovered from the Black Aja, both linked to dreams, and the purse, that was their prize from Tanchico, one of the seals on the Dark One's prison. As much as she wanted to find out where Swan Sanche wanted them to chase the Black Aja next, the seal was the source of her haste to reach Tarvalin. Digging coins from one of the fat purses, she avoided touching the flat purse. The longer it remained in her possession, the more she wanted to hand it to the Amerlin and be done with it. Sometimes she thought she could feel the Dark One trying to break through when she was near the thing. So they start off with a plan. They have a cold trail when it comes to the Black Aja, and while I think Nynaeve might have tried to find another way, to seek any other kind of clue she possibly could find rather than return to Tarvalin, the seal is above her pay grade, especially because it feels like it's leaking evil. She's got to get rid of the fucking thing. But very quickly, RJ has them go from seeking dark friends or artifacts, active work, something that feels like a duty, to running and hiding, searching for a safe place until they can get a hold of the information to know where to go next. They shift from hunters to hunted, and the circus is just part of the disguise. Beyond the circus plot diverging from Nynaeve and Elaine's MO up to this point in the series, the whole flavor of the plotline is different from their general mystery stories. It honestly has more in common with Perrin's arc in The Shadow Rising, giving a sense of a tale within a tale where Nynaeve is the main character, except that Perrin's story is a solemn yet heartwarming tale with a sprinkling, well, perhaps a liberal infusion of tragedy, whereas this is a meandering stress fest filled with comic moments. RJ focuses a lot on Nynaeve in Book 5. She has nearly 30% of the total word count, equaling Rand, who only clocks 1,000 more words than she does. Egwene, coming in at 7.5% of the word count, is a distant third. When it comes to our main heroes, Rand and Nynaeve are at the heart of the Fires of Heaven, with everybody else getting what time they can as RJ builds the story. In fact, so much is focused on Nynaeve that she'll get an episode all her own, because while she's at the center of this tale within a tale, unlike Perrin's in The Shadow Rising, this arc does not stand alone. It's integral to the entire story that is the Fires of Heaven, and weaves into all of the other plot lines beautifully, which is why, despite whatever issues that it might have, I don't think that Nynaeve and Elaine joining the circus takes away from the overall greatness of the writing in Book 5. Nonetheless, there are issues, and for me, in fact probably for everybody, the biggest is the train wreck that is what RJ decided to do with Elaine and Tom. I can reason my way to letting the other issues go, or finding a rationale to explain them, but not the cringe bullshit that is what the fuck he's doing with Elaine and Tom. I am 100% with Lesby Nerdy. This shit goes on my list of the Wheel of Time moments that I just pretend don't exist. Let me break down what I think RJ was trying to do with this. At least I'll do my best. The Fires of Heaven is the first book where he starts to tone down his propensity to engage in recap, sort of. He still wants to emphasize or remind us of things, so he'll either keep it to a single sentence, or if the concepts are more complicated or he wants to convey multiple ideas, he might just give us a horrific, contrived scene like the one where Elaine is creeping on Tom, in order to force a conversation where Nynaeve, exasperated with Elaine's behavior, takes her for a walk into Martison and gives her a come-to-Jesus talk. What the fuck are you doing? You're being grossly inappropriate. Let me list the reasons why, starting with he's way too fucking old for you. And I would rather pull out my own tongue than read a quote because it makes me want to die. Suffice it to say that instead of just doing a basic expository recap, RJ uses this conversation to remind us of Mint's vision about Rand and 3 women, remind us of the fact that Elaine and Rand are a thing, and the fact that Lon and Nynaeve are a thing, and... Okay, I can bear to read this one bit here. Are you certain Mint had one of her visions? Yes. I wasn't at first, but the more I think on it, the more sure I become. She joked about it too often to mean anything else. Well, whatever Min had seen, Rand was no Aiel. Oh, his blood might be Aiel, as the wise ones claimed, but he had grown up in the 2 rivers, and she would not stand by and let him take up wicked Aiel ways. She doubted very much that Elaine would, either. Is that why you've been, she would not say throwing yourself at, teasing Tom? Elaine gave her a sidelong glance, the crimson back in her cheeks. "There are 1,000 leagues between us, Nynaeve. Do you think Rand is refraining from looking at other women? A man is a man on a throne or in a pigsty." She had a stock of homely sayings from her childhood nurse, a clear-headed woman named Linny whom Nynaeve wished she would meet one day. "Well, I don't see why you have to flirt just because you think Rand might." She refrained from bringing up Tom's age again. "Lon is old enough to be your father," that small voice murmured. "I love Lon." And then it goes on and goes back to making me wince. Here RJ is foreshadowing Rand hooking up with Aviendha, and he's showing Elaine getting her head around the idea of non-monogamy a bit by A. showing that she's reasoned minced jokes are covering up a viewing, B. having her pragmatically point out to Nynaeve that men, hetero men obviously, look at women. They don't just look at the one woman that they're in love with, they want to fuck a lot of other people. And C. I think that overall he's trying to show that women desire other people as well, but the message is getting lost in the medium. But on a more individual character level, he's having Elaine thinking to herself, if I have to share Rand, then perhaps I will explore as well. And that's fine. It's even logical in the sense that non-monogamy is not an effortless relationship model to slip into. Honestly, RJ having these women, Elaine and Min anyway, explore their feelings and not really feel all that great about it in the beginning is perfectly realistic. Take it from me, you can be happy to be in a non-monogamous relationship and still have challenging feelings about certain situations. And you work through all that because the overall benefit of the relationship is one where you definitely like non-monogamy overall, even if it can occasionally be an emotional struggle. So I feel like this kind of an examination, showing that it requires exploration in order to be something you can get your head around, is a reasonable thing to do. And in fact, I would argue that it was necessary for the general monogamy-minded 90s audience to see something like this, so they wouldn't feel like, even with her 2 confusing letters, that Rand's a giant asshole for fucking Aviendha later on in the book. But not Tom! Not Tom! And I even understand the logic behind the choice of Tom. Not RJ's logic. As a writing choice, it was an abysmal fail. But the logic that he felt the character Elaine would have. Tom is safe. She would pick him knowing that he would never take advantage of her. He would never actually be interested, so she could practice this type of flirting with someone that she finds attractive with no worries that it would go too far. And I've seen people complain about Elaine's interest in Tom and flat out say men write this type of stuff because they want younger women to be interested in them, but there are actually no younger women who are interested in older men that way. And that's patently false. I was a 17, 18-year-old girl once, and I had a number of crushes on older men, mostly teachers, because they were smart and self-assured and sophisticated, all of the things that Elaine is listing that she finds attractive in Tom. And they were safe, because the type of professors that I had the hots for were the type of professors that would never in a million years creep on me. There are young women who are interested in older men, so saying an attraction like this is utterly unrealistic is bullshit. Though I get why they say it too. Older men shouldn't hit on young women, whether or not they're interested. So, the character of Elaine would have the logic of picking Tom knowing that he was safe, which is something she might not be certain of with Julian, who is the only other man she has to choose from. When they're drugged by Rhonda Makura and the men come and rescue them, they have to walk off the effects of the fork root. Tom is walking around with Nynaeve, and Elaine finds herself wishing that she was walking with Tom instead. Partly from jealousy, but mostly it's just that Julian's arm feels a little too familiar around her waist. She's not as comfortable with Julian because he doesn't feel safe in the same way. He doesn't seem like someone where you could 100% trust him not to creep on you. You can probably trust him 90%, but not totally. But Elaine flirting with Tom makes her look utterly foolish. And that is not the end of the world. She's 18 years old, and people her age will occasionally look foolish. People her age will occasionally do ridiculous fucking things. But she starts out this book doing that shit, and she is making Tom, and also all of the rest of us, uncomfortable. And it's like, is that really necessary for Elaine to do that? Does she have to do that to poor Tom? And RJ at least acknowledges that it's cringe and creepy for Elaine to be hitting on this old dude by having Nynaeve remark upon his age, telling her, yo, he's old enough to be your father at the very least, though she internally also calls herself a hypocrite. This is the book of Nynaeve acknowledging her own hypocrisy a good deal. She's muttering to herself, it's not like you're not working with an age gap with Lon, and then she's like, I love Lon, it's totally different, which it is for a number of reasons. But hypocrisy or not, I understand where she's coming from. I always am instinctively judgmental when I see people who have a large gap in their age. And it may be hypocritical, but I also don't think it's necessarily wrong to look at a couple with a big age gap and hold the older partner to a higher standard, and scrutinize them and ask myself, are they a creep? Did they take advantage of their partner's youth to exploit a power dynamic in the same way you'd take advantage of somebody because they were naive or uneducated, financially vulnerable, crippled with low self-esteem, etc. There are any number of ways that a shitbag can exploit a power dynamic and abuse their partner. Or did the person look at their partner's youth, find it incredibly unattractive, but determine they could live with it? You know, Lon is the type of person who looked at Nynaeve's age and immaturity and was like, I can live with it. I can't imagine Lon finding it attractive in the slightest. But Nynaeve is 8 years older than Elaine. At 18, there is nothing but creepiness about this, especially because once it comes into the open that they're previously acquainted, they shift into father-daughter mode, which makes it more uncomfortable, especially on rereads. I guess if you only read the series once, maybe you just kind of forget about it, but those of us who are insane about the Wheel of Time don't forget, and we're always just like, why? So if RJ wanted to give a sense of ambiguity to Rand and Elaine's relationship and show her exploring non-monogamy by expressing interest in other men, it should have been with someone else. Luca is my first choice. If RJ could have maybe specified that he was about Min's age, he makes it sound like he's Nynaeve's age, so make sure to indicate that he's younger, or else one of the show folk, one of the jugglers, put 2 paragraphs into fleshing out a character. Who knows? But especially because Nynaeve has no interest in flirting with anybody else, so while having Luca be melodramatically into her is good for comic effect, if you wanted to actually have that relationship serve a purpose and take out the train wreck that is this bullshit with Elaine and Tom, Luca would have been a good choice, provided he wasn't too old. RJ could have developed the interest he originally shows in Elaine instead of having him switch that interest to Nynaeve. That would have served the story so much better. Even if you cut out Elaine's cringy flirting, her relationship with Tom is disappointing. It has so much potential, but it never feels like they have a real connection. And if it were up to me, I think it could have been improved by just a small, simple little change. Along with her not flirting with Tom, Elaine never should have forgotten Tom. Elaine was born in 981. The male channeler pogrom ended in 985, and Tom's nephew was one of the last victims of it, so we know that Elaine was 3 or 4 when Tom left, which is perfect mustache-tugging and few solid memories age, but there's no need for the male channeler pogrom to fit into such a tight time frame, and there's no need for Elaine to be quite as young as she is. She could be a year older. As long as Gowan's older than she is, if she were a year older and if the male channeler pogrom lasted another 3 or 4 years so that Elaine was 8 or 9 when Tom left, she would have been old enough to remember him, but him, being a stupid old man, would easily be able to kid himself and be like, oh, she was a little kid, she wouldn't remember me. So that he comes to the Stone of Tyr and sees the daughter heir of Andor and treats her like a stranger, and she'd be looking at him like, what the fuck? You have the arrogance, as Moraine accuses him of, to walk around with the same fucking name that you had as the court bard in Camelin, and you look me in the eye and then walk past me and you act like you don't know who the fuck I am? And so she'd feel so angry and hurt and confused as to why he was pretending not to know her. And her getting drunk in Tanchico could be her moment of no longer, in every conversation or interaction with him, staring at him and giving him that look that somebody gets when they've got something that they want you to acknowledge. Instead, she gets some liquid courage, stomps up the stairs, bangs on the door, and confronts him and is like, this is bullshit. You know who I am. I know that you know who I am. We know each other. Quit this. Quit acting like we're strangers. Why did you leave? All I know is that you left and my mother never wanted to talk about it. What the fuck happened? Why did you leave me? And her anger toward her mother, which in the actual text manifests as slut-shaming of, oh, she fucked you, and then she fucked Gareth Bryn, and now she's fucking this Gabriel, and then Tom hauls off and slaps her. Instead of that bullshit, she could be angry about the fact that her mother never explained anything. And while all Morghese knew was that he disappeared, and when he came back he was shitty to her and called her a puppet of Tar-Valon and acted like an asshole, and so she was like, I'm gonna have your head chopped off, dick. All of the hurt that could be in that, all of the feelings and the relationship that was already there, that's real. That's real. And that's an easy thing to fit within the frame of the story, and I wish that that is what we had with them, because their parent-child dynamic could be believable there, but what Robert Jordan gives us doesn't make it that way. It just makes it weird. And it's a shame, because Elaine does need that father figure, and I think RJ tries to establish the permanent dynamic of the father-daughter thing between her and Tom in The Fires of Heaven, because the man who filled the role of her father for the longest rejects her at the end of the book. When Elaine, after they arrive in Saladar, gets a chance to speak to Gareth Bryn, he treats her like shit. She and Nynaeve are grilled by the Saladar Six for hours, and when they come out, Tom and Uno try to convince them the place is a burning, sinking ship, and they should steal horses and get the fuck out. Bryn comes in, and it says... Elaine smiled, nodding graciously, a far cry from her astonished stares coming into Saladar when she had first recognized him at the length of the street. I will not say it is entirely good to see you, Lord Gareth. I have heard of some difficulty between Mother and you, but I am sure it can be mended. You know Mother is hasty sometimes. She will come round and ask you back to your proper place in Camelin, you may be certain of it. Done is done, Elaine. Ignoring her astonishment, Nynaeve doubted anyone who knew Elaine's rank had ever been so curt to her. He turned to Uno. And a little bit further, after he asks Uno to train his heavy cavalry and recruits Tom as a spy, it says, He practically ignored me, Elaine said incredulously. I don't care what the trouble is between him and Mother. He has no right. So, Nynaeve's an asshole. Sometimes I think that there are people who think shitty things about Elaine because Nynaeve thinks so many shitty things about Elaine in this book. Here, Nynaeve looks at her reaction and thinks, oh, she's so shocked that someone would be curt to her when she's such a high rank. And it's like, no, Nynaeve, no. This is her stepdaddy. This is the guy that raised her. Somebody who she should be able to assume loves her. Someone that she loves. He's part of her family. And so she's reaching out to him. Stepdad, I'm sorry that Mom was mean to you. She'll ask you back. It'll be better. Obviously, you belong at home, and even if you guys technically broke up, you deserve to be her general. And if he would at least sit down with her as she's trying to tell him, it'll all be okay, because she doesn't understand how broken it is, he could be kind and tell her, no, it's broken, it can't be fixed, but I'll always love you. But instead he's a shit, and he turns his back on her. And I know that that's a thing that happens all the time. People divorce, people split up, and a step-parent who has been in someone's life since they were small but has no legal right or obligation to them will disappear. My mother had friends who married when the wife had a 5-year-old son. They had 2 kids, and they divorced very contentiously 9 years later. And they were originally doing visitations where he would take all 3 kids, but he acted like a shit, and she decided to be petty, and all of a sudden, she wouldn't let him take the older boy anymore, or he refused to take the older boy unless she gave him money, and she wouldn't do it, or some other bullshit. They were acting like fucking children. They were assholes. And all of a sudden, this boy couldn't see the man who had been his father for nearly 10 years, because grown-ass adults were all caught up in their hurt feelings. So while I get that Bryn is heartbroken, he's also being childish. A good step-parent, even if he wanted to leave it all behind, even if interacting with Elaine is painful because she resembles her mother, would suck it up and give Elaine the acknowledgement she deserves and have a frank talk with her and tell her done's done, but I still think of you as my kid, and I'm still on your side, and I'm still glad you're in my life. Even if it's not necessarily true, because Bryn's deep down in his feelings. That's what a fucking grown-up in this sort of situation says to a young person they've raised if they're not childish, a selfish asshole, or a monster. And as for Nynaeve and her uncharitable thoughts toward Elaine, who's just a hurt young person right here, I'll have more to say about that in her episode. Anyway, that was a lot to say about something I didn't particularly plan to talk about. Back to Martison. Nynaeve and Elaine walk into Martison, and Nynaeve lectures Elaine about creeping on Tom, but they also want to go and get vegetables. So they continue into town, where RJ provides a convenient trap for them to fall into, because falling into traps is one of their favorite hobbies. It says, hanging upside down beside the door of a thatched-roof seamstress's shop was a bunch of what looked almost like broomweed, with tiny yellow flowers. The stalks wrapped their whole length in a white ribbon, then tied with a dangling yellow one. It might have been some woman's feeble attempt at a festive decoration in the midst of hard times, but she was sure it was not. Stopping beside an empty shop with a carving knife incised on the sign still hanging over the door, she pretended to search for a stone in her shoe while furtively studying the seamstress's shop. The door was open, and colorful bolts of cloth stood in the small paned windows, but no one went in or out. "Can you not find it, Nynaeve? Take off your shoe." Nynaeve's head jerked. She had almost forgotten that Elaine was there. No one else was paying any attention to them, and no one looked close enough to overhear. She still lowered her voice. "That bunch of broomweed by that shop door. It is a yellow Aja signal, an emergency signal from one of the yellow's eyes and ears." She did not have to tell Elaine not to stare. The girl's eyes barely moved toward the shop. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "And how do you know?" "Of course I'm certain. It's exact. The hanging bit of yellow ribbon is even split in 3. She paused to take a deep breath. Unless she was completely mistaken, that insignificant fistful of weeds held a dire meaning. If she was wrong, she was making a fool of herself, and she did hate to do that. "I spent a good deal of time talking with yellows in the tower. Healing was the main purpose of the yellows. They did not care much for her herbs, but you did not need herbs when you could heal with the power. One of them told me. She did not think it too great a transgression, since she was sure I'll choose yellow. Besides, it has not been used in nearly 300 years. Elaine, only a few women in each Aja actually know who the Aja's eyes and ears are, but a bunch of yellow flowers tied and hung like that tells any yellow sister that here one is, and with a message urgent enough to risk uncovering herself." "How are we going to find out what it is?" Nynaeve liked that. Not what are we going to do. The girl had backbone. "Follow my lead," she said, gripping the basket tighter as she straightened. She hoped she remembered everything Shamaran had told her. She hoped Shamaran had told her everything. The plump yellow could be fluttery for an Aes Sedai. This book has the women, for plot purposes, in convenient possession of knowledge known only to Aes Sedai. And while I find Elaine knowing the warder bond to strain credulity, it's easy for me to conceive of Shamaran sharing this information with Nynaeve. Elida set the stage in the prologue for our perception of Shamaran. Anxious, timid, and not particularly respected by fellow sisters because she's not how an Aes Sedai should be. According to the Wheel of Time companion, she's a talented healer, but lots of good healers join other Ajas. I'm guessing that she joined the Yellows because she assumed they would be the nicest. Regardless, Nynaeve would be instinctively kind to Shamaran because she would sense how fragile she is. The difference between Nynaeve and Swan Sanche when it comes to their bullying natures is that Swan, facing a fragile person, would push her advantage because their fragility would make them easy to bulldoze. Nynaeve would never bully a fragile person because she knows that fragile people might break and that they respond best to kindness. And so Shamaran would like Nynaeve because Nynaeve would show her the respect due to a fellow human being. Not particularly respect due to an Aes Sedai. Nynaeve doesn't give a fuck about that. But she would like Shamaran because she wouldn't have Aes Sedai pretensions. Nynaeve could get away with speaking to her as an equal. And so I could see them having really pleasant conversations, and in the course of those, Shamaran happily volunteering a number of the more minor Aja secrets, including this one, because it hasn't been used in 300 years, and she was sure Nynaeve would pick yellow anyway, so what's the big deal? I can totally buy that. So they go into the shop, and Nynaeve gives Rhonda McCura the passphrase. It has to be something with yellow and heal in it. And it says... Mistress McCura stared at her for a moment with dark eyes, then turned to the thin girl, pushing her toward the back of the shop. "Go on to the kitchen, Lucy, and make a pot of tea for these good ladies. From the blue canister. The water's hot, thank the light. Go on, girl, put that down and stop gawking. Quickly, quickly, the blue canister. My best tea," she said, turning back to Nynaeve as the girl vanished through a door at the rear. "I live over the shop, you see, and my kitchen is in the back." She was smoothing her skirts nervously, thumb and forefinger of her right hand forming a circle for the great serpent ring. There would be no need for an excuse about the dress, it seemed. Nynaeve repeated the sign, and after a moment Elaine did too. "I am Nynaeve, and this is Elaine. We saw your signal." The woman fluttered as if she might fly away. "The signal? Ah, yes, of course." "Well," Nynaeve said, "what is the urgent message?" "We should not talk about that out here. Mistress Nynaeve, anyone might walk in." Nynaeve doubted that. "I will tell you over a nice cup of tea. My best tea, did I say?" Nynaeve exchanged looks with Elaine. If Mistress McCura was this reluctant to speak her news, it must be appalling indeed. "If we may just step into the back," Elaine said. "No one will hear but us." Her regal tone made the seamstress stare. For a moment Nynaeve thought it might cut through her nervousness, but the next instant the fool woman was babbling again. "The tea will be ready in a moment. The water's already hot. We used to get Tarabonner tea through here. That is why I'm here, I suppose. Not the tea, of course. All the trade that used to be, and all the news that came both ways with the wagons. You are mainly interested in outbreaks of disease or a new kind of illness, but I find that interesting myself. I dabble a little with—" She coughed and rushed on. If she smoothed her dress any harder, she would wear a hole in it. "Some about the children, of course, but you are not much interested in them, really." "The kitchen, Mistress Mercura," Nynaeve said firmly, as soon as the other woman paused for breath. If the woman's news made her this afraid, Nynaeve would brook no more delay in hearing it. "So the Yellow Network is useful. Elida refers to it as pitiful in the prologue and says there's nothing about sickness or healing they can learn from non-channelers, but knowing about disease outbreaks is super important. If a new pandemic is spreading on the West Coast, they have people who send them that news. I'm not sure if they dispatch any sisters to actually deal with it, but maybe they pass the info on so other lands are prepared, or maybe they do work in the world occasionally if there's a major disease. Regardless, the network is helpful, and while the Yellows might not be particularly interested in any White Cloak information that Rhonda Mercura would send them, they could pass that news on to other Ajas. I don't know if they do, or if they just assume the other Ajas have eyes and ears to give them that news, but I like to think that pre-coup, before all the fuckery and suspicion began to abound among the Loyalists, they'd have shared that info. Nynaeve and Elaine have enough real-world experience at this point not to drink this tea. If Egwene were still part of the Supergirl group, she would never have drunk this tea. Rhonda Mercura's behavior would have had alarm bells ringing so fucking hard. Because Egwene learns from situations, because Egwene is not foolish enough to believe that women by default are immediately more harmless than men, she would have tried to warn the others off, and if Nynaeve and Elaine were dead set on having tea, Egwene would pretend to drink and then when the others passed out, lay waste. But Egwene is neither a diplomat nor a healer. Here we have a healer and a diplomat, dealing with someone who is obviously terrified, a person who is courageous enough to be a tower agent in a place like Amadicia, an authoritarian land with white-cloaked brown shirts breathing down everyone's neck. So their instinct is to calm her and soothe her fear, and it seems like RJ is giving a nod to British culture by implying that tea makes everything better. So Nynaeve thinks, well, of course, let's have some tea, because that'll calm her down. I love you guys. Nearly 10% of my audience is in Britain, and it makes me super happy because I'm an unabashed Anglophile. So, Forkroot has its problems as a plot device, but having a way, a pharmacological way, not something where you require an artifact and training in order to be effective. Having a pharmacological way for non-channelers to be able to fight back or hold their own against channelers is nice. It keeps people from getting too OP, and it provides interesting plot opportunities. And there's something great about the mundanity of it. In a world of magic-wielding people and powerful magical artifacts, here's a little simple science. The tea has to have a purpose because it sounds like Rhonda discovered what it does to channelers by accident, so I'm guessing she uses it as a painkiller and sleep aid. But whatever is different in a brain's physiology that wires someone to channel makes them extremely susceptible to this potent medication. That's honestly super realistic. There's a protein receptor in your brain that controls your sensitivity to alcohol. If you're a lightweight, it reacts to the slightest stimulation and you get fucked up really easily. Imagine a similar receptor riding on the gene that makes you able to channel. It's super plausible. And while having Elaine and Nynaeve fall into this trap and need rescuing is annoying, their more charitable natures overriding their caution is something I can believe of them at this point in the series, and the scene is packed with good stuff, perhaps most importantly the women learning that something is not right in the tower. Mercura tells them the message, which is that all sisters are welcome to return to the White Tower. The tower must be whole and strong. And then shortly after that, they pass out because they've been drugged. After Tom and Julian come to the rescue, Nynaeve and Elaine interrogate Rhonda Mercura and her assistant because they reasonably assume that these are Dark Friends hatching a Dark Friend plot, and that somehow a trap has been laid for them by the Black Aja, which is a reasonable assumption. And so they're like, hey, how long have you worked for the Black Aja? How long have you been Dark Friends? And they're stunned. They're very vehement in their protestations. And so the women are like, sounds like you guys are being truthful, and we're therefore even more confused. After Mistress Mercura insists that she serves the yellow Aja, not the black, we get from Nynaeve, "If you serve the yellow," she said slowly, "why did you drug us?" "It was her," the seamstress replied, nodding at Elaine. "I was sent her description a month since, right down to that way she holds her chin sometimes, so she seems to be looking down at you. Naranwen said she might use the name Elaine, and even claimed to be of a noble house." Word by word, her anger over being called a dark friend seemed to bubble higher. "Maybe you were a yellow sister, but she's no Aes Sedai, just a runaway accepted. Naranwen said I was to report her presence and that of anyone with her, and to delay her if I could, or even capture her, and anyone with her. How they expected me to capture an accepted I do not know. I don't think even Naranwen knows about my forkroot tea, but that is what my orders said. They said I should risk exposure even, here, where it'd be my death if I had to. You just wait until the Amyrlin puts her hands on you, young woman, on all of you." "The Amyrlin?" Elaine exclaimed. "What does she have to do with this?" "It was on her orders. By order of the Amyrlin seat, it said. It said the Amyrlin herself said I could use any means short of killing you. You will wish you were dead when the Amyrlin gets hold of you." Her sharp nod was full of furious satisfaction. So they're bewildered by this, but they figure, well, since we don't want to have to worry about this happening again, we better disguise ourselves. So they dye Elaine's hair black and help themselves to some of Rhonda's dresses, and they send the guys to go buy an old coach that Nynaeve saw sitting in a yard and prepare to flee. RJ ends this chapter with a great cluster of what I called in the last book relay race style paragraphs that have this flavor of third-person omniscience. He starts it with a group perspective. A few people goggled when Noy Torvald's coach pulled up in front of Rhonda Mercura's shop, drawn by a team of 4, with chests strapped to the roof and a saddled horse tied on behind. Noy had lost everything when the trade with Terabon collapsed. He was scraping a living doing odd jobs for Widow Taryn now. No one in the street had ever seen the coachman before, a tall, leathery fellow with long white mustaches and cold, imperious eyes, or the dark, hard-faced footman in a Terabonner hat who jumped down nimbly to open the coach door. The goggling turned to murmurs when 2 women swept out of the shop with bundles in their arms. One wore a green silk gown, the other plain blue wool, but each had a scarf wrapped around her head so that not so much as a hint of her hair was visible. They all but leaped into the coach. 2 of the children began sauntering over to inquire who the strangers were, but while the footman was still scrambling up to the driver's seat, the coachman cracked his long whip, shouting something about making way for a lady. Her name was lost as the children threw themselves out of the way, tumbling in the dusty street, and the coach rumbled away at a gallop toward the Amador Road. The onlookers walked away talking among themselves, a mysterious lady, obviously, with her maid, making purchases from Rhonda Mercura, and rushing away from the Children of the Light. Little enough happened in Mardison of late, and this would provide days of conversation. The Children of the Light brushed themselves off furiously, but finally decided that reporting the incident would make them look foolish. Besides, their captain did not like nobles. He would probably send them to bring the coach back, a long ride in the heat, for no more than an arrogant young sprig of one house or another. If no charges could be brought, always tricky with the nobility, it would not be the captain who took the blame. Hoping that word of their humiliation did not spread, they certainly never thought of questioning Rhonda Mercura. A short time later, Theron Lugay led his cart into the yard behind the shop, provisions for the long journey ahead already packed away under the round canvas top. Indeed, Rhonda Mercura had cured him of a fever that had taken 23 the winter before, but it was a nagging wife and a shrewish mother-in-law that made him glad of a journey all the way to where the witches lived. Rhonda had said someone might meet him, though not who, but he hoped to make it to Tarvallen. He tapped on the kitchen door 6 times before going in, but it was not until he climbed the stairs that he found anyone. In the back bedroom, Rhonda and Lucy lay stretched out on the beds, sound asleep and fully clothed if rather rumpled, with the sun still in the sky. Neither woman roused when he shook them. He did not understand that, or why one of the coverlets was lying on the floor cut into knotted strips, or why there were 2 empty teapots in the room but only 1 cup, or why a funnel was lying on Rhonda's pillow, but he had always known that there was a great deal in the world he did not understand. Returning to his cart, he thought about the supplies Rhonda's money had purchased, thought of his wife and her mother, and when he let the cart horse off it was with the intention of seeing what Altara was like, or maybe Murundy. One way and another, it was quite a time before a disheveled Rhonda Mercura tottered up to Avi Shendar's house and sent off a pigeon, a thin bone tube tied to its leg. The bird launched itself north and east, straight as an arrow toward Tarvallen. After a moment's thought, Rhonda prepared another copy on another narrow strip of thin parchment and fastened it to a bird from another coop. That one headed west, for she had promised to send duplicates of all of her messages. In these hard times, a woman had to make out as best she could, and there could be no harm in it, not the sort of reports she made to Narrenwen. Wondering if she could ever get the taste of fork root out of her mouth, she would not have minded if the report brought just a little harm to the one who called herself Nynaeve. Hoeing in his garden patch as usual, Avi paid no attention to what Rhonda did, and as usual, as soon as she was gone, he washed his hands and went inside. She had placed a larger sheet of parchment underneath the strips to cushion the nib of the pen. When he held it up to the afternoon light, he could make out what she had written. Soon a third pigeon was on its way, heading in still another direction. So this perspective slips from the group, narrows into the two white cloaks for part of a paragraph, and then singles in on the man who's repaying Rhonda's favor by agreeing to take the women to Tar Valon, before passing the baton to her and finally to Avi Shendar. And it's amazing the tonal shifts in those few paragraphs, because it really feels like you're getting the thoughts and feelings of many, slimming down to a couple of annoyed douchebags, and then to this one guy, Theron Lugay, who RJ, with his masterful skill with POV, imbues with quite a bit of personality for his 2 paragraphs before moving on to Rhonda. And I assume that her duplicate message going west is to the Shanchan. She's making money however she can, and it makes sense that the Shanchan would have recruited local informants. And the next time that we see her, she is actually working for them. She's quite embittered because Elaida is such a piece of shit that rather than acknowledging it's not Rhonda's fault that Elaine and Nynaeve were able to get away, she chooses to punish her for it and make an example because Elaida sucks. And so naturally, Rhonda is very resentful about that, and when Amadicia falls to the Shanchan, she's like, let me give you all of the information that I have, and here's my cool tea that you can use against channelers, which is the reason that Perrin has the fork root that he needs in Book 11 to be able to attack Malden. If not for this, then that. But Rhonda, who sounds like she's pretty loyal to the Tower, thinks to herself, it's not like the intelligence that I sent to Narrenwen is important, so really what difference does it make if I'm selling it to the Tower's enemies? I'm not telling them anything that would hurt Tar Valon, and a woman's gotta eat. As for Avi Shendar's pigeon that he sends, I am guessing that he is the reason Moghedien manages to hone in on them. He probably has some higher-up dark friend he reports to, and that one presumably passed the info on to our Forsaken. It doesn't take long, though, because she knows where they are within 2 days. After they drive away from Mardison in the coach, we cut to the 2 chapters in Lugard where we have Swan, and then the day after we have Gareth Bryn, and then we come back to Nynaeve and Elaine 2 days later, heading to the town of Sienda. We spend 5 chapters with them. They stay the night in Sienda, have a trip into Tel Iran Riyadh, and then they sneak away from Galad and join the circus the following day. We then cut to chapter 18 from Leandrin's point of view, where she goes back to the house in Amador that she's staying at with all of her Black Aja cronies and Moghediens there. She conscripts all of them and sends them off on different assignments, but Leandrin and a handful of others she keeps to help her look for Nynaeve. It says, the day before yesterday she was in a village called Sienda, perhaps 60 miles east of here, with another young woman in whom I may be interested, but they have vanished. So if Moghedien left Nynaeve and Elaine alone for the entire month it took them to ride their wagon of dyes across Terrebonne, we can only conclude that it was because she lost them. And if she found them in Sienda, we can only conclude it was because she got some manner of intelligence as to their location. I'm guessing that's due to Avi Shendar's pigeon. So, after visiting with Swan and Gareth Bryn in Lugard, we get back to Nynaeve and Elaine as they're riding in the coach towards Sienda, and Nynaeve is being a shit. Her original suggestion was that they would travel disguised as 2 ladies with their driver and footman, and Elaine had to explain to her that a lady always travels with a maid, and if there are 2 ladies, they'd have 2 maids. And she pointed out to Nynaeve in a tactful and reasonable fashion that it would be better if she played the lady and Nynaeve the maid, since Elaine had a lot more practice and was knowledgeable with the ins and outs and minutiae of being a lady, down to such little things like you always travel with a maid. And the fallout of that is this great scene in the coach. It says, the trouble had started last night at a place called Bellin, on a muddy stream grandly named the Gain River, some 20 miles or so beyond the capital. The Bellin Ford Inn was larger than the first, and Mistress Alfara, the innkeeper, offered the Lady Morellin a private dining room, which Elaine could not very well refuse. Mistress Alfara had been sure that only the Lady Morellan's maid Nana would know how to serve her properly. Ladies did require everything just so, the woman said, as well they should, and her girls were simply not used to ladies. Nana would know exactly how the Lady Morellan wanted her bed turned down, and would prepare her a nice bath after a hot day of travel. The list of things that Nana would do exactly right for her mistress had been endless. Elaine was not sure whether Amadisian nobility expected such, or Mistress Alfara was just getting work out of an outlander's servant. She had tried to spare Nynaeve, but the woman had been as full of "as you wish," and "my lady is most particular," as the innkeeper. She would have seemed a fool, or at least odd, to press it. They were trying to avoid attracting undue attention. As long as they had been in Bellin, Nynaeve had acted the perfect lady's maid in public. In private was another matter. Elaine wished the woman would just revert to herself instead of bludgeoning her with a lady's maid from the Blight. Apologies had been met with "my lady is too kind," or simply ignored. "I will not apologize again," she thought for the 50th time. "Not for what was not my fault. I've been thinking, Nynaeve." Gripping a hanging strap, she felt like the ball in the children's game called Bounce in Andor, where you tried to keep a colorful wooden ball bouncing up and down on a paddle. She would not ask for the coach to be slowed, though. She could stand it as long as Nynaeve did. The woman was so stubborn. "I want to reach Tarvalin and find out what is going on, but my lady has been thinking? My lady must have a headache from all that effort. I will make my lady a nice tea of sheep's tongue root and red daisy as soon as—" "Be quiet, Nana," Elaine said, calmly but firmly. It was her very best imitation of her mother. Nynaeve's jaw dropped. "If you pull that braid at me, you can ride on the roof with the baggage." Nynaeve made a strangled sound, trying so hard to talk that nothing came out. Quite satisfactory. "Sometimes you seem to think I am still a child, but you are the one behaving like a child. I did not ask you to wash my back, but I would have had to wrestle to stop you. I did offer to scrub yours in turn, remember? And I offered to sleep in the trundle bed, but you climbed in and wouldn't get out. Stop sulking. If you like, I will be the maid at the next inn." It would probably be a disaster. Nynaeve would shout at Tom in public or box someone's ears, but anything for a little peace. "We can stop right now and change in the trees." "We chose the gowns to fit you," the other woman muttered after a moment. Pushing the flap open again, she shouted, "Slow down! Are you trying to kill us? Fool men!" There was dead silence from above, as the coach's speed diminished to something much more reasonable, but Elaine would have wagered the two men were talking. She straightened her hair as best she could without a mirror. It was still startling to see those glistening black tresses when she did look in one. The green silk was going to need a thorough brushing itself. "What was it you were thinking, Elaine?" Nynaeve asked. Crimson stained her cheeks. At least she knew that Elaine was right, but backing down was very likely as much apology as she would ever give. And so we see that not having any experience as a maid was equally problematic, since if Nynaeve had just kept quiet, as I'm pretty sure an actual maid would have, Elaine could have handled the situation and spared her all that unnecessary labor. I love that scene. Elaine is always the peacemaker. She always goes to soothe Nynaeve's temper. She always makes the effort, and she should not have to. And here she's realizing it's bullshit, and finally just fucking calls it out. "You're being childish, and I'm over it." So Nynaeve asked her, "Hey, what was it that you were thinking?" And Elaine's like, "Yo, so maybe let's not rush back to the tower until we have an idea exactly why these orders were given, because it doesn't seem wise." And then their coach lurches to a halt because they run into the menagerie. Bears and lions and something called a kapar from the Aiel waste that sounds like it might be a javelina, and of course the elephants, of whom the horses are terrified, which is why the coach has lurched to a stop. And it is really fun to see Luca in his fledgling circus barker phase. He is great. It says, "I am Valin Luca, my lady, showman extraordinary. Your presence overwhelms me." He made another bow, even more elaborate than the first. Elaine shared a look with Nynaeve, catching the same amused smile that she knew she herself wore. A man very full of himself, this Valin Luca. His men did seem to be very good at soothing the horses. They still snorted and stamped, but their eyes were not so wide as they had been. Tom and Julian were staring at the strange animals almost as hard as the horses were. "Boar horses, Master Luca?" Elaine said. "Where do they come from?" "Giant boar horses, my lady," was the ready reply, "from fabled Shara, where I myself led an expedition into a wilderness full of strange civilizations and stranger sights to trap them. It would fascinate me to tell you of them. Gigantic people twice the size of an ogier." He made grand gestures to illustrate. Beings with no heads, birds big enough to carry off a full-grown bull, snakes that can swallow a man, cities made of solid gold. Descend, my lady, and let me tell you." Elaine had no doubt that Luca would fascinate himself with his own tales, but she certainly doubted that those animals came from Shara. For one thing, even the sea folk saw no more of Shara than the walled ports they were confined to. Any who went beyond the walls was never seen again. The Aiel knew little more. For another, she and Nynaeve had both seen creatures like these in Falma during the Shanshan invasion. The Shanshan used them for work animals and for war. "I think not, Master Luca," she told him. "Then let us perform for you," he said quickly. "As you can see, this is no ordinary wandering menagerie, but something entirely new, a private performance. Tumblers, jugglers, trained animals, the strongest man in the world, even fireworks. We have an illuminator with us. We are on our way to Geldon, and tomorrow we will be gone on the wind, but for a pittance—" "My mistress said she thinks not," Nynaeve broke in. "She has better things to spend her money on than looking at animals." In fact, she herself kept a tight fist on all their coin, reluctantly doling out what they needed. She seemed to think everything should cost what it had back in her Two Rivers. "Why would you want to go to Geldon, Master Luca?" Elaine asked. The other woman did make rough spots and leave them to her to smooth over. "I hear there is a great deal of trouble there. I hear the army has not been able to suppress this man called the Prophet with his preaching of the Dragon Reborn. Surely you do not want to travel into riots?" "Greatly exaggerated, my lady, greatly exaggerated. Where there are crowds, people want to be entertained, and where people want to be entertained, my show is always welcome." Luca hesitated, then stepped closer to the coach. An embarrassed look crossed his face as he gazed up into Elaine's eyes. "My lady, the truth of the matter is that you would do me a very great favor by allowing me to perform for you. The fact is that one of the boar horses caused a little trouble in the next town up the road. It was an accident," he added hastily. "I assure you, they are gentle creatures, not dangerous at all. But not only are the people of Sienda unwilling to let me put on a show, or even come to one here, well, it took all of my coin to pay for the damages, and the fines." He winced, "especially the fines. If you allowed me to entertain you, for a trifle, truly, I would name you as patroness of my show wherever we go across the world, spreading the fame of your generosity, my lady." "Morellon," she said. "The Lady Morellon of House Samared." With her new hair she could pass for Kyrianan. She had no time to see his show, as much as she would have enjoyed it another time, and she told him so, adding, "But I will help you a little if you have no money. Give him something, Nana, to help him on his way to Geldon." The last thing she wanted was him spreading her fame, but helping the poor and those in distress was a duty she would not slight when she had the means, even in a foreign land. Grumbling, Nynaeve dug a purse out of her belt pouch and dipped into it. She leaned out of the coach enough to press Luca's hand around what she gave him. He looked startled as she said, "If you took a decent job of work, you would not have to beg. Drive on, Tom." Tom's whip cracked, and Elaine was thrown back into her seat. "You did not have to be rude," she said, "or so abrupt. What did you give him?" "A silver penny," Nynaeve replied calmly, putting the purse back into her pouch, "and more than he deserved." "Nynaeve," Elaine groaned, "the man probably thinks we were making sport of him." Nynaeve sniffed. With those shoulders, a good day's work would not kill him. Elaine kept silent, though she did not agree. Not exactly. Certainly work would not harm the man, but she did not think there was much available. Not that I think Master Luca would accept work that did not allow him to wear that cape. If she brought it up, though, Nynaeve would probably argue. When she gently pointed out things that Nynaeve did not know, the woman was quite capable of accusing her of having an arrogant manner or of lecturing, and Val and Luca was hardly worth another altercation so soon after smoothing over the last. It must be really fucking exhausting being Nynaeve's friend. RJ is highlighting the strain in our dynamic duo's relationship. They've gotten along really well up until now. Nynaeve's temper for Elaine has been like water off a duck's back. But this whole book, they're in a pressure cooker, and Elaine is no longer so good at letting it go. She's starting to be resentful at how often she lets Nynaeve's bullshit slide. And Nynaeve has a lot of struggles. She's dealing with a lot of stress, and it's hot. And what started as a pretty straightforward, yet still stressful journey of we gotta get to Tarvalin, the seal is oozing evil, we want to get rid of it, is now much less cut and dried. Now they have neither destination nor specific goal beyond find the good Aes Sedai. That night Nynaeve goes in to tell Iran Riyadh. She meets up with Egwene, and she and Egwene go into the tower and learn that Elida is Amyrlin. and Nynaeve is reading through Elida's papers and sees about the suspected gathering of Blue Sisters and glances at the name Saladar just as Egwene reads a paper signed by Elida as Amerlin and shouts, "Oh, light, no." And so Nynaeve doesn't quite retain the name and spends the rest of the book trying to remember Saladar while they run and hide, eventually from Moghedien, but originally from Galad. They come down to breakfast the following day after they've found out that Elida is Amerlin. They're eating and pondering their next move, and all of a sudden, Galad sits down and is like, "I thought it was you, Elaine, but the hair put me off," and he fills in the blanks for them. It says, "You cannot know what has happened there, Elaine," he continued. "All the corruption and vileness in that place bubbled to the top, as it had to. The woman who sent you away has been deposed." He looked around and dropped his voice to a momentary whisper, despite no one being close enough to overhear. "Stilled and executed." Taking a deep breath, he made a disgusted sound. "It was never a place for you, or for Egwene. I have not been long with the children, but I am certain my captain will give me leave to escort my sister home. That is where you should be, with Mother. Tell me where Egwene is, and I will see that she is brought to Caemlyn too. You will both be safe there." Nynaeve's face felt numb. Stilled and executed. Not an accidental death or illness. That she had considered the possibility did not make the fact less shocking. Rand had to be the reason. If there had ever been any small hope that the tower might not oppose him, it was gone. Elaine showed no expression at all, her eyes staring at the distance. "I see my news shocks you," he said in a low voice. "I do not know how deeply that woman meshed you in her plot, but you are free of her now. Let me see you safely to Caemlyn. No one need know you had any more contact with her than the other girls who went there to learn. Either of you." Nynaeve showed him her teeth in what she hoped looked like a smile. It was nice to be included, finally. She could have smacked him, if only he were not so good-looking. "I will think on it," Elaine said slowly. "What you say makes sense, but you must give me time to think. I must think." Nynaeve stared at her. It made sense? The girl was blathering. "I can give you a little time," he said, "but I do not have much if I am to ask leave." And then his friend Trom shows up, and Galad's like, hey, she doesn't like me and won't like you. How about let's fuck off? Which they do, though Galad's body language indicates he's not finished with them. And Elaine freaks out. She says, "Nana, I need you upstairs," and tells the innkeeper Nana will settle the bill. Nynaeve pays her, and when she gets upstairs, Elaine is hurriedly packing. And Nynaeve says, "Elaine, what's the matter?" "We must leave immediately, Nynaeve, at once." She did not look up until the last article was crammed in. "Right this minute, wherever he is, Galad is puzzling over something he may never have faced before. Two things that are right but opposite. To his mind it is right to tie me to a pack-horse if necessary and haul me to Mother to solve her worries and save me from becoming Aes Sedai, whatever I want. And it is also right to turn us in to the White Cloaks or the army or both. That is the law in Amadicia, and White Cloak law too. Aes Sedai are outlawed here, and so is any woman who has ever trained in the Tower. Mother met Ielron once to sign a trade treaty, and they had to do it in Altara, because Mother could not legally enter Amadicia. I embraced Saidar the moment I saw him, and I won't let it go until we are far from him." "Surely you exaggerate, Elaine. He is your brother." "He is not my brother." Elaine drew a deep breath and let it out slowly. "We had the same father," she said in a calmer voice, "but he is not my brother. I will not have him. Nynaeve, I've told you time and again, but you will not take it in. Galad does what is right. Always. He never lies. Did you hear what he said to that Trom fellow? He didn't say he did not know who we are. Every word he said was the truth. He does what is right, no matter who is hurt by it, even himself, or me. He used to tell on Gowan and me for everything, and on himself, too. If he decides the wrong way, we will have White Cloaks lying in ambush for us before we reach the edge of the village." A tap sounded at the door, and Nynaeve's breath caught in her throat. Surely Galad would not really... Elaine's face was set, ready to fight. Elaine misjudges Galad. He is capable of far more nuance than she gives him credit for. He joins the White Cloaks because they believe in something. He reads the original text and takes it to heart because it has good stuff in it. And so he joins this organization filled with extremists who have very probably distorted Lothair Mantelar's intent when he wrote it. According to the Wheel of Time companion, Mantelar founded the Children during the War of 100 Years to proselytize against an increase in Dark Friends. It makes sense that there'd be an increase, since that coincides with one of Ishamael's release cycles. Proselytize against, not persecute. He founded them in the first 30 years of the war, and the companion says they morphed into a military organization over the course of the war. So if I had to guess, I'd say that probably happened after Mantalar died. So Galad, in reading and appreciating the original text, is like someone genuinely believing in the teachings of Christ and then joining a church. Hashtag not all churches. I know that there are churches that aren't actually full of bigoted shitbags, but I'm a queer person living in the United States where so many of them are, so I default to that assumption for safety's sake. Don't at me. I'm on Team Elaine for judging Galad's choices. I know that he is more nuanced, and I know that her saying he will absolutely have us murdered if we don't say we're going to go to Camelin is neither true nor fair, but judging his choices, his pure intentions mean nothing. Galad is like the guy who votes Republican even though he doesn't believe most of the really monstrous things that they support, but he signs on the line because he believes in the philosophical principle of small government, and it's like, I'm sorry, but at that point you're contributing to every bad thing they do, even if you don't believe them, because they have some base principles that you feel are good, and at that point, fuck you. When human rights and human lives are in the balance, fuck you. He's the sort of privileged person who feels like intentions are what count. He's an anti-Swan, and while he will treat you a lot better than she will, the world that his choices would build would be a dumpster fire. So I feel like Elaine's response is fair, not because I think he would turn them into the children, but because he feels perfectly entitled to rob adults of their agency to keep them safe. And Elaine seeing him as a total monster is childish, but also quite shrewd, since he feels any end is acceptable if the means are right. And in the end, that is just as horrible as a person who feels any means are acceptable when the end is good. Galad catches up to them toward the end of the book in Samara. They join the menagerie to get away from him and head toward Geldon, crossing the river into Samara, which is the border town between Geldon and Amadicia. And the women are waiting, desperately hoping for a ship to come before Moghedien catches up to them. Nynaeve runs into Uno at the show. The Prophet is in Samara, and so are a number of the Shinerans that were part of the original crew that came from Valdara with Rand. Nynaeve approaches Uno, and he takes her into the city where they join up with Regan, and they go to see Masema because he might be able to get her a ship. And on the way back, Uno mutters that there's a white cloak following them, and Nynaeve's cursing herself like, fuck, I had to go see the Prophet, I'm a stupid ass, why did I decide to do that? And she tries to duck Galad, but can't shake him, and so she's forced to confront him. It says, "What are you doing in Geldon? I thought you were on your way to Altara." For a moment he stared down at her with those dark, beautiful eyes, then abruptly laughed. "In all the world, Nynaeve, only you would ask me the question I should be asking you. Very well, I'll answer you for all it should be the other way round. I did have orders for Saladar and Altara, but all changed when this Prophet fellow—" "What is the matter? Are you unwell?" Nynaeve forced her face to smoothness. "Of course not," she said irritably. "My health is quite good, thank you very kindly." Saladar! Of course! The name was like one of Eludra's fire sticks going off in her head. All of that racking of her brain, and Galad casually handed her what she had been unable to dig up on her own. Now if only Masema found a ship quickly, if only she could make sure Galad would not betray them. Without letting Uno and Regan kill him, of course. Whatever Elaine said, Nynaeve could not believe she would appreciate having her brother cut down. Small chance he would believe Elaine was not with her. "I just cannot get over my shock at seeing you." A small patch on mine when I learned you had slipped out of Sienda. Sternness became that handsome face to an unfortunate degree, but his tone offset it somewhat. He could have been lecturing a small girl who had sneaked out of the house after her bedtime to climb trees. "I was sick near to death with worry. What under the light possessed you? Have you any idea of the risks you ran? And to come here, of all places! Elaine always chooses to saddle a horse at the gallop if she can, but I thought that you at least had more sense. This so-called Prophet—" He cut off, eyeing the other two men. Uno had grounded his sword point, scarred hands folded atop the pommel. Regan appeared to be inspecting his blade's edge to the exclusion of everything else. "I have heard rumors," Galad went on slowly, "that he is Shineran. You cannot have been witless enough to get yourself mixed up with him." There was too much question in that for her taste, by far. Neither of them is the prophet, Galad, she said wryly. I've known them both for some little time, and I can assure you of that. Uno, Regan, unless you intend to prune your toenails, put those things up. Well? They hesitated before doing as they were told, Uno grumping under his breath and glaring, but they did it finally. Men usually responded to a firm voice. Most did. Sometimes, anyway. I hardly thought they were, Nynaeve. Galad's tone, even more arid than hers, made her bristle, but when he went on he sounded annoyed rather than superior, and worried, which made her bristle even more, of course. He all but gave her palpitations, and he had the nerve to be worried. I do not know what you and Elaine have fallen into here, and I do not care, so long as I can extract you from it before you are hurt. Trade is slow on the river, but a suitable boat of some sort should call in the next few days. Let me know where I can find you, and I will secure you passage to somewhere in Altara. From there you can make your way to Camelin. She gaped in spite of herself. You mean to find us a ship? It is all I can do now. He sounded apologetic and shook his head as if arguing with himself. I cannot escort you to safety. My duty is here. We wouldn't want to take you from your duty, she said, a touch breathless. If he wanted to misunderstand, let him. The most she had hoped for was that he would leave them be. He seemed to feel the need to defend himself. It is hardly safe to send you off alone, but a boat will take you away before the entire border explodes, which it will sooner or late. All it needs is one spark, and the prophet is sure to strike it if no one else does. You must see to getting yourselves to Camelin, you and Elaine. All I ask is your promise that you will go there. The tower is no place for either of you, or for... He clamped his teeth shut, but he might as well have gone ahead and named Egwene. It could not hurt having Galad looking for a boat, too. If Masema could forget whether he intended to close the taverns, he could forget to have anyone find a riverboat, especially if he thought a convenient bout of forgetfulness might keep her there to further his own plans. It could not hurt if she could trust Galad. If she could not, then she would have to hope he was not as good with that sword as he thought he was. A stark thought, but not so stark as what might happen, would happen, if he proved untrustworthy. I am what I am, Galad, and Elaine is the same. Dodging around Masema had put a bad taste on her tongue. A little White Tower sidestepping was as close as she could come. And you are what you are now. She raised her eyebrows significantly at his white cloak. That lot hates the Tower, and they hate women who can channel. Now that you are one of them, why shouldn't I think there will be 50 of you after me inside the hour trying to put an arrow in my back if they can't haul me off to a cell? Me and Elaine as well. Galad's head jerked in irritation, or maybe he was offended. How often must I tell you? I would never let harm come to my sister, or to you. It truly was annoying, realizing that she was annoyed at the pause that made it clear she was an afterthought. She was not some silly girl to lose her wits because a man had eyes that somehow managed to be melting and incredibly penetrating at the same time. If you say it so, she told him, and his head tossed again. Tell me where you are put up, and I will bring word or send it as soon as I locate a suitable vessel. If Elaine was right, he could no more lie than could an Aes Sedai who had sworn the 3 oaths, but still she hesitated. A mistake here could be her last. She had a right to take risks for herself, but this risk involved Elaine, too, and Tom and Julian, for that matter. They were her responsibility, whatever they wanted to think. But she was here, and the decision had to be hers. Not that it might be any other way, frankly. Light, woman, what more do you want of me? Galad growled, half raising his hands as though to grab her shoulders. Uno's blade was between them in a flash of bright steel, but Elaine's brother actually brushed it aside like a twig and paid it no more mind than one. I mean no harm to you, now or ever. I swear it by my mother's name. You say that you are what you are? I know what you are, and what you are not. Perhaps half the reason I wear this, he touched an edge of his snowy cloak, is because the Tower sent you out, you and Elaine and Egwene, for the light knows what reason, when you are what you are. It was like sending a boy who has just learned to hold a sword into battle, and I will never forgive them. There is still time for both of you to turn aside. You do not have to carry that sword. The Tower is too dangerous for you and my sister, especially now. Half the world has become too dangerous for you. Let me help you to safety. The tightness slid from his voice, though it took on a raw edge. I beg you, Nynaeve, if anything happened to Elaine, I half wish that Egwene were with you so I could... Scrubbing a hand through his hair, he looked left and right, searching for how to convince her. Uno and Regan held their blades ready to drive through his body, but he did not appear to see them. In the name of the light, Nynaeve, please allow me to do what I can. It was a simple thing that finally tipped the balance in her mind. They were in Gelden. Amadicia was the only land that actually made a crime out of a woman being able to channel, and they were on the opposite bank of the river. That left only Galad's oaths as a child of the light to battle against his duty to Elaine. She gave blood the edge in that struggle. We don't see Galad again in the flesh until Book 11. Beyond mentions of him in Morghase's narrative, while she's a White Cloak captive in Lord of Chaos, he's just off being a White Cloak out of sight. But RJ takes this time in the circus plot to give him some development. He's about a level 5 character, not really very important on his own, but he serves a super important purpose, and I appreciate that. He's there to return the White Cloaks to their base principles as much as possible, to redeem the ones that can be redeemed. I appreciate RJ letting him make a case for himself in this book, to say, oh, maybe the shithead brother isn't really the shithead brother that we thought he was, you know? And then the next book we get to see, oh, maybe Gowan's actually the shithead brother. But let Elaine's brother inform our opinion himself, rather than just taking her word for it that we should hate him. RJ's like, haha, is he really that hateful? Elaine hates him, and her hate of him is not necessarily totally unreasonable from the perspective of somebody who's a child, but even RJ has her grow to the point of understanding him more and coming to a place where she looks forward to seeing Galad and feels like he's not all that bad, and I appreciate that. There is a maelstrom of heat and stress and terror going into Samara, and we get to see firsthand the scary proportions that Massima's insanity has grown to. And to offset it a bit, especially because we spend so much time in Nynaeve's head, and she spends so much of the book angry and stressed, RJ fills this plotline with comic moments. But there is this overarching dread, and that is largely because Moghedien knows where they are. We learn that Nynaeve has Birgitte looking for Moghedien when she goes into Tel Iran Riyadh in Sienda. Before she meets with Egwene and the Wise Ones, she has a quick discussion with Birgitte where she's like, have you found her? And Birgitte's like, no, but not for lack of trying, so she might know I'm looking for her. And that is questionable wisdom, but personally, when there's a spider in the room, I feel much better if I can see it. I always want to know where it is. Nynaeve feels confident in her search for Moghedien because she's beaten her before, but she's looking to pick this fight in Tel Iran Riyadh, and while she wins in the end by thinking outside of the box, it is a bad situation with no good options for her. Birgitte's choice to help is in violation of the prescripts, and who the fuck wrote those anyway? She helps out of friendship and duty, and I suspect boredom quite a bit, and the fact that Moghedien is on her turf. She's like, I've been living in the world of dreams, which is where we, the heroes of the Horn, are specifically assigned to chill out, and then you assholes get out of Shale Ghul, and now I have to tolerate your sinister presence? Fuck that noise. And because Birgitte chooses to help, she pays for it, in what I feel is one of the most interesting and unique narrative choices that RJ makes, having Moghedien rip Birgitte away and send her out of the world of dreams into the flesh. And I'm not going to delve too much into the incident in this episode, except to say that I find Elaine knowing the warder bond hard to believe. You know, it says she's seen it done twice. Where? Where was she peeping on people to see it done? The best that I can come up with is that maybe Greens do a ceremony when a sister bonds her first warder out in the warder grounds, like a place a novice could believably have access to. I don't know how she'd get past the warders who'd undoubtedly be providing security for what has to be a private event, but that's the only remotely plausible thing I can come up with. If you can think of a believable way Elaine might have hidden the shadows and peeped at sisters bonding warders, please tell me in the episode discussion channel of the Podcast of the Dragon Discord server. I am dying to hear your theories. Anyway, Birgitte is ripped away, and the men find her outside the wagon. And so they bring her inside, and Nynaeve can't heal her. She keeps trying, and she's like she's dying even though there's nothing wrong with her. And so it says, I can do something that might help, Elaine said slowly. You were supposed to have permission, but it had not always been so. Once it had been done almost as often without as with. There was no reason it should not work on a woman, except that she had never heard of it being done to any but men. And a little bit further. Stop, Nynaeve. You said yourself it is not working. Stop and let me try. If it doesn't work, you can... She could what? If healing worked, it worked. If it did not, there was no point in trying again if it failed. Try what? Nynaeve snapped, yet she moved away awkwardly, letting Elaine come close. The weave of healing faded, but not the shining nimbus. Instead of answering, Elaine put one hand on Birgitte's forehead. Physical contact was as necessary for this as for healing, and the 2 times she had watched it done in the tower, the Aes Sedai had touched the man's forehead. The flows of spirit she wove were complex, if not so intricate as Nynaeve's of a moment before. She barely understood some of what she was doing, and none at all of other parts, yet she had paid close attention from her hiding place to how the weave was shaped, watched closely because she had built up a stock of stories in her head, made silly romances where there so seldom were any. After a moment she sat down on the other bed and let Saidar go. Nynaeve frowned at her, then bent to examine Brigida. The unconscious woman's color was perhaps a little better, her breathing a little stronger. "What did you do, Elaine?" Nynaeve did not take her eyes from Brigida, but the glow around her faded away slowly. "It wasn't healing. I think I could do it myself now, but it was not healing." "Will she live?" Elaine asked faintly. There was no visible link between her and Brigida, no flows, but she could sense the woman's weakness, a terrible weakness. She would know the moment Brigida died, even if she was sleeping or hundreds of miles away. "I do not know. She isn't fading any more, but I do not know." Weariness made Nynaeve's voice soft, and pain touched it strongly, as if she shared Brigida's injury. Wincing, she rose and unfolded a red-striped blanket to spread over the woman lying there. "What did you do?" Silence held Elaine long enough for Nynaeve to join her, lowering herself awkwardly onto the bed. "Bonding," Elaine said finally. "I bonded her, as a warder." The incredulous stare on the other woman's face made her rush on. "Healing was doing no good. I had to do something. You know the gifts a warder gets from being bonded. One is strength, energy. He can keep going when other men would collapse and die, survive wounds that would kill anyone else. It was the only thing I could think of." And eventually Elaine goes outside, where Tom and Julian have the silver arrow. The silver arrow that fell alongside the naked Brigida when she was ripped away. And we're never told in the text that the silver arrow is what Elaine uses to make the Adam that they use on Moghedien, but it is there in the supplemental source material, which I really appreciate. I was always puzzled as to how the Fires of Heaven ends, and then Lord of Chaos starts and all of a sudden they have a leashless Adam. Where did that come from? And I appreciate him not trying to clunkily insert it anywhere, but I always wondered, and if you wondered too and didn't know, Elaine made it out of the silver arrow. Anyway, the men are incredibly concerned because Nynaeve isn't quite right. The whole scene in Tel Riyadh with Moghedien and Brigida was incredibly traumatizing. She's distraught because she realizes that trying to pick a fight on Moghedien's turf was fucking stupid, and she feels responsible for what happened to Brigida. And so the men tell Elaine, yeah, she's been weird. She's not acting like herself. She was being nice to us and crying, and you've got to fix it because it makes us uncomfortable. Basically, cheer her up. It says, "I will do what I can," she assured them, turning the arrow again. They were good men, and she did not like lying to them or hiding things from them. Not unless it was absolutely necessary anyway. Nynaeve claimed that you had to manage men for their own good, but there was such a thing as taking it too far. It was not right to lead a man into dangers he knew nothing of. So she told them about Tel Riyadh and the Forsaken being loose, about Moghedien. Not quite everything, of course. Some events in Tanchico had been too shaming for her to want to think of them. Her promise held her concerning Brigida's identity, and there was certainly no need to go into detail about what Moghedien had done to Nynaeve. It made explaining this night's happenings a little difficult, yet she managed. She did tell them everything she thought they should know, enough to make them aware for the first time what they were really up against. Not just the Black Aja, that had certainly made them stare cross-eyed when they learned it, but the Forsaken, and one of them very likely hunting her and Nynaeve. And she made it quite plain they too would be hunting in Moghedien as well, and that anyone close to them was in danger of being caught between hunter and prey either way. "Now that you know," she finished, "the choice to stay or go is yours." She left it at that and was careful not to look at Tom. She hoped almost desperately that he would stay, but she would not let him think that she was asking, not by so much as a glance. And of course both of the men decide to stay because they're very loyal and they're not going to abandon them. And I'm wondering if in having Elaine explain everything to the men, RJ's not just showing that she's a good leader, but if there is some of his Vietnam experience peeking through here. Like he's having Elaine be the kind of officer that he felt like men deserved. My father was a photographer for the Air Force in Vietnam. He developed top-secret photography, and he realized that the government was lying to the soldiers about what areas were safe, what roads were under American control. He saw that they were sending soldiers down roads that were actually not safe, and that they were lying to people and putting them in dangers that they knew nothing about, and it devastated him. He was so outraged because it was so wrong. And Elaine here is being like, yeah, it's wrong to have someone face such a terrible danger and not even know or be aware of it. And so I kind of wonder if RJ is drawing parallels and having Elaine do the right thing. And Nynaeve is unhappy about it later, but Elaine has determined, no, these people deserve to know what they're facing and to be able to decide whether or not they really want to see this through. They are at this point exposed, and they have to assume that Moghedien lived because Nynaeve knows that the arrow didn't hit her heart. If she was able to rip Birgitte away, she's probably not going to die. Therefore, it's presumably only a matter of time before she finds them, which leads to another problem that many people have with the circus arc. How catty the women are to each other during the last few days. And all I can say to that is, it's hot, and they're waiting, they're confined and in terrible danger, and it's hot. After Nynaeve's trip into Samara, where both Masema and Galad offer to get her a ship, we cut to 6 chapters in Cairhien with Rand and crew where they battle the Shido. And then we come back to the circus, and to Nynaeve's very miserable head in the morning as she gets out of bed thinking about all of these disturbing dreams that she's just had. And it says, all just worry, of course, and natural enough. 3 nights camped here without a ship appearing. 3 sweltering days of standing blindfolded against that cursed piece of wall. That was enough to put anyone on edge, even without worrying whether Moghedien was closing in. But then, just because the woman knew they were with a menagerie did not mean she had to find them in Samara. There were other traveling menageries in the world besides those gathered here. Thinking up reasons not to worry was easier than not worrying, though. And a little bit further it says, in truth, anxiety and lack of sleep were only part of what made her mood vile this morning. The others were such minor things, but they were realities. A pebble in your shoe was small compared to having your head cut off, but if the pebble was there and the chopping block might never be... It was not possible to avoid her own reflection, and her hair hanging loose about her shoulders instead of decently braided. Brush it how she would, the brassy red color never became less loathsome, and she knew all too well that a blue dress was laid out on the bed behind her, a blue to make even a tinker woman blink and cut as low as the original red gown hanging on a peg. That was why she had on this precariously clinging shift. One dress like that was not enough, not according to Val and Luca. Clarine was at work on another pair in a virulent yellow, and there was talk of stripes. Nynaeve did not want to know about stripes. At least the man could let me choose the colors, she thought, working at a split twig furiously. Or Clarine. But no, he had his own ideas, and he never asked, not Val and Luca. His color choices sometimes made her forget the necklines. I had to throw it in his face. Yet she knew she would not. Birgitte flaunted herself in those dresses without the hint of a blush. The woman was certainly nothing like any of the stories about her. Not that she was going to wear the full dress without protest because Birgitte did. She was not competing with the woman in any way. It was just... If you have to do a thing, she growled around the twig, best you get used to it. What did you say? Elaine asked. If you're going to talk, please take that out of your mouth. The noise is disgusting otherwise. Wiping her chin, Nynaeve glared over her shoulder. Elaine was seated on her own narrow bed with her legs drawn up beside her, braiding her black-dyed hair. She already had on her white breeches, all sewn with spangles, and a snowy silk blouse with ruffles at the neck that was much too sheer. Her sequin-splattered white coat lay beside her. White. She also had 2 suits of clothes for performing, with a third in the making, all in white, if not exactly plain. If you are going to dress in that fashion, Elaine, you should not sit so. It's indecent. The other woman glowered sullenly, but she did put her slippered feet on the floor, and raised her chin in that haughty way she had. I think I may take a walk into the town this morning, she said coolly, still working at the braid. This wagon is confining. Rinsing her mouth, Nynaeve spat into the washbowl, loudly. The wagon certainly did seem smaller by the day. Maybe they did need to keep out of sight as much as possible. It had been her idea, one she was coming to regret, but this was becoming ridiculous. 3 days shut up with Elaine, except when they went to perform, was beginning to feel like 3 weeks, or 3 months. She had never before realized what an acid tongue Elaine had. A ship had to come. Any kind of ship. She would give every last coin hidden in the brick stove, every last jewel, anything for a ship today. Well, that wouldn't attract any attention, would it? But perhaps you could use the exercise, or maybe it's just the way those breeches fit your hips. So they're being shitty. Elaine has stopped letting anything slide. Nynaeve has never realized before what an acid tongue Elaine had because it's not Elaine's default habit to be a shit. And having Nynaeve say your ass looks fat in those pants is not cool. And while she's mostly slut-shaming rather than fat-shaming, that doesn't make it any better. And while a man writing about women treating each other that way isn't cool, I don't know that it's beyond the realm of possibility that they would act like that toward each other. From what I read in the Am I the Asshole subreddit, people, men, women, and everything in between, say all kinds of appallingly shitty and critical things to each other, including slut-shaming and fat-shaming things. People are assholes to each other in all kinds of different ways, including people who care about each other. And the reality is, if I were shoved into a tiny box with 2 other people, I wouldn't need the stress of enemies to make me an asshole. I wouldn't need the stress of potential riots to make me an asshole. All I would need would be the heat, and being shoved into a tiny box with some other people. So I feel like these women being assholes to each other is super realistic. And while the shitty things they say to each other are unfortunate and disappointing, I don't know that they're necessarily unbelievable. But this day things in Samara tip. Julian and Tom come back from scouting into the city to report that the shit has hit the fan, and after days of feeling like it could explode at any second, violence has finally broken out. And just after that, Uno arrives, and it says, Massima's people found the ship, River Snake or something like, not an hour after it docked, but White Cloak seized it. That's what started this little row. The bad news is the White Cloaks still hold the docks. The worst is Massima may have forgotten the ship. I went to see him and he wouldn't hear of ships. All he can talk about is hanging White Cloaks and making Amadicia bend knee to the Lord Dragon if he has to put the whole land to the torch. But he hasn't bothered to tell all of his people. There's been fighting near the river and may still be. Getting you through the riots will be bad enough, but if there's a battle at the docks, I make no promises. And how I'm to put you on a ship in White Cloak hands I don't begin to know. Letting out a long breath, he scrubbed sweat from his forehead with the back of a scarred hand. The strain of so long a speech without cursing was plain on his face. Nynaeve might have relented on his language at that moment, if she had not been too stunned to speak. It had to be coincidence. Light, I said anything for a ship, but I didn't mean this. Not this. She did not know why Elaine and Birgitta were staring at her with such blank expressions. They had known everything she had, and neither had brought up this possibility. The 3 men exchanged frowns, obviously aware that something was going on, and just as obviously unaware what it was, for which thank the light. Much better when they did not know everything. It just had to be coincidence. In one way she was more than happy to focus on another man making his way through the wagons. And then after several paragraphs discussing showfolk, the women panting over Galad and his beauty, says, It was you, wasn't it? She demanded before he even reached her. You seized the river snake, didn't you? Why? River serpent, he corrected, eyeing her incredulously. You did ask me to secure you passage. I didn't ask you to start a riot. A riot? Elaine put in. A war. An invasion, all begun over this vessel. Galad answered calmly. I gave Nynaeve my word, sister. My first duty is to see you safely on your way to Camelin, and Nynaeve, of course. The children would have had to fight this prophet soon or late. Couldn't you simply have let us know the ship was here? Nynaeve asked wearily. Men and their word. It was all very admirable sometimes, but she should have listened when Elaine said he did what he saw as right no matter who was hurt. I don't know what the prophet wanted the ship for, but I doubt it was so you could take passage downriver. Nynaeve flinched. Besides which, I paid the captain your passage while he was still unloading his cargo. An hour later, one of the 2 men I left to make sure he did not sail without you came to tell me the other man was dead and the prophet had taken the ship. I don't understand what you are so upset about. You wanted a ship, needed a ship, and I got you one. So, they have to fight their way to the docks. And it's just a horrific, horrible scene of violence. And there's something to the brutality of a fanatical mob that's unlike anything else. But they get to the docks, and there are a whole bunch of refugees trying to leave, and Nynaeve is like, I'm not doing this again. I am not leaving desperate people behind. And so they twist the captain's arm and load all of these people on board, which includes 3 extra and special douchebags. 3 women that Nynaeve is like, oh, I totally identify with all of these women, and all of them will come to be giant pains in the ass to some degree. After she gets the refugees onto the riverboat, Nynaeve goes in search of Galad. It says, She supposed he deserved some thanks. He had thought what he was doing was the right thing. That was the trouble with the best of men. They always thought they were doing the right thing. Still, whatever the 3 had done, they had saved argument. She found him with Elaine, that handsome face painted with frustration. He brightened at the sight of her. "Nynaeve, I've paid your way as far as Boanda. That's only halfway to Altara, where the Bourne runs into the Eldar, but I could not afford to pay further. Captain Neres took every copper in my purse, and I had to borrow besides. The fellow charges 10 prices. I'm afraid you will have to make your own way to Camelin from there. I truly am sorry." "You have done quite enough already," Elaine put in, her eyes drifting toward the plumes of smoke rising above Samara. "I gave my promise," he said with a weary resignation. Plainly they had had the same exchange before Nynaeve came. Nynaeve managed to offer her thanks, which he dismissed graciously, but with a look as if she too did not understand, and she was more than ready to admit as much. He started a war to keep a promise. Elaine was right about that. It would be a war, if it was not already. Yet with his men holding Neres' ship, he would not demand a better price. It was Neres' ship, and Neres could charge as he chose, as long as he took Elaine and Nynaeve. It was true. Galad never counted the cost of doing right, not to himself or anyone else. What a shit show. And then they're on the river and sailing down toward Altara. And RJ invests a ton of exposition in getting to Saladar. It's a lot, and it's mostly focused on Nynaeve's character development. But suffice it to say that their adventuring is at an end, at least for most of the next book. They're basically off to the White Towers version of Outdoor School, and it's going to suck. And as they're being rowed ashore near to Saladar, it says, "Nynaeve, have you thought about how we're going to be received?" Nynaeve looked at Elaine in astonishment. They had crossed half the world, or near enough, and defeated the Black Aja twice. Well, they had had help in Tyr, but Tanchico had been all their doing. They brought news of Elida and the tower she was willing to bet no one in Saladar had, and most importantly they could help these sisters make contact with Rand. "Elaine, I won't say they will greet us as heroes, but it wouldn't surprise me if they kissed us before today is done." Elaine is probably thinking, fool me once. She came back to Tarvalin at the beginning of Book 3 with Nynaeve and Egwene, the only one of the three not surprised that they were in trouble, because she surmised that, hey, if our return is all in secrecy, they're obviously not going to give the real reason why we were gone, which means they have to come up with some reason. They're going to throw us under the bus. So she asks Nynaeve because she's given thought to how they'll be received, and she suspects it's not going to be great. But we're in Nynaeve's head here, so we're getting her good spirits, where she's like, "We've done all this great stuff, and we're coming with information and important opportunities, so they'll be super happy to see us." And RJ does that to us so that he can start the next chapter showing Nynaeve after 4 hours dealing with the Saladar Six, having all of her hopes dashed and all of her assumptions destroyed, and regrets. So many regrets. And I feel like if we were in Elaine's head, she'd be thinking, Nynaeve sounds naive and borderline foolish, but we've only just stopped acting like dicks to each other. So I'll just keep my mouth shut. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. I had a really good time delving into everything to do with the circus. I felt like I could either slight the circus, slight Nynaeve, or do 2 separate episodes. It's generally a good idea to err on the side of more analysis, so I went with option 3. My goal is to have Nynaeve's episode out before JordanCon. We'll see how it goes. My rough drafts are now available on Patreon. They'll be uploaded 2 to 3 weeks before the final, and you'll be able to see how it improved, what I added, and what I cut out. If you'd like to support the show and have access to those or other fun content, there is a link in the show notes. There are other links to my Discord and email, etc., to my YouTube, and to my Twitter handle, @PodOfTheDragon. There's also a link to Apple Podcasts. If you could go and review me, either there or on whatever platform you're listening on, I'd really appreciate it, because it will help other people find me. And so will word of mouth. So if you know anyone who likes the Wheel of Time and might be interested in a different kind of podcast, please tell them about me. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. My name is Morgan. And if I had a presumptuous relative who felt entitled to rob me of my agency because he felt he knew what was best for me, I wouldn't need any more reason than that to get as far away from him as I could.